Good morning, learners. I am Mr. Maniki from ANESCA, and today we are here to study biology form 4. And our topic today is support and movement in plants and animals, but our focus will be support in plants. So, welcome so much, and I hope you will be able to learn a lot in this topic. So, in our beginning, we will learn what is support. And as you can see, support refers to the ability of the organism to bear their weight and also to maintain their body forms. So remember, organisms have weight, they have mass. Organisms carry weight. How do they support that weight? That is what is referred to as support. On the other hand, we have the word movement. And what is movement? It is the change in position of either a part of the organism or the whole organism. For example, if I'm lifting my hand, that is movement. A part of my body is moving. But when I come from one place and I move from one place to the other, then that is also movement, but another movement which is called locomotion, which we are going to see in our later discussion. Now, when we talk about plants, our main emphasis today, you will see that there are two main types of movement in plants. We have movement at cell level. Movement at cell level. And that's why you remember in Form 3, you talked about the pollination and the growth of pollen tube. Immediately, the pollen grain lands on the stigma, it will grow and germinate inside the stigma until it reaches the embryo sac. And that growth is a kind of movement. And it is a movement of a cell. So that is cellular type of movement. There is another type of movement that is swimming of the male gametes. These are cells in bryophytes. Remember, an example of bryophyte is the moss plant. The moss plant, and also pteridophyte. An example is the fern, the blackened fern. Remember, in Form 3, in the first topic of classification 2, you are taught that these two organisms, which are individual bryophyta and individual pteridophyta, these organisms have what is called gametophyte generation and sporophyte generation. And in gametophyte generation, that is where the gametes move in the process of fertilization. The other type of movement in plants is the movement in form of organ, at an organ level. Movement at an organ level. Remember, in the previous lesson of irritability, you are taught about tropisms, and these are growth movement. Remember, we have phototropism, where a plant will grow towards unidirectional light. A plant will grow and the shoot will grow towards a unidirectional light. It will bend towards the source of light. And that is what is referred to as tropisms. We also have hydrotropism. We also have different types of tropism. And then we also have nastism. Nastism. And this is the response of organism. The response of organism due to non-directional stimuli. Non-directional stimuli. So we have what's called nastism. For example, we have what is called the type of nastism that is represented by an organism called Mimosa pudica. Mimosa pudica. This organism shows forth an example of nastism, which is called haptonast. It is called haptonast. And this type of plant, Mimosa pudica, is known that when you touch the leaf, they lose the water and it shrinks. The leaf will shrink after losing water. That is an example of a movement. But now it's a movement of an organ, which is the leaf losing water, shrinking, becoming small. As I said before, we have already seen what is support, what is movement. We have seen the two types of movement in plants. I've given examples. Now we will come to the point of what is locomotion. Locomotion. And this is the progressive change in position of the whole organism. For example, if I move from this position and make steps and go now locomotion. It is still movement. I'm changing position, but now it is the whole body which is now locomotion. And it is important to note that plants do not move. You have never seen a plant, a maize plant, moving from one place to the other. The leaves will move because of wind, but the whole maize plant cannot move from here to here. That is why we are saying plants do not show locomotion, but they do move. Either by when the plants are being swayed by the leaves, when the roots are growing from one place to the other, that is a kind of movement, but not locomotion. Good. Now we move now to this section, which is now necessity of support and movement. Why do we need support and movement in plants? Now, dear learner, I will let you know that today, the first point we have on our board here is it is important for support and movement to expose the leaves for maximum absorption of light, which is necessary for what? Photosynthesis. Necessary for photosynthesis. So the reason why we need to expose leaves here is because of photosynthesis. And remember, photosynthesis is the process by which plants make their own food. So they need to be supported for the leaves to remain upright. Number two, to expose the flowers to agents of pollination. Remember, the flowers can be pollinated by wind, by insects. That one was taught in production in Form 3. For them to be exposed to the agents of pollination, they will need to be supported to remain upright so that the flower can be exposed. Number three, to expose the fruits and the seeds to dispersal agents. So that the fruits, remember for example the Bidens spinosa, which contain some seeds which are very light, they have to be exposed so that they can be carried by the proper agent of dispersal. Proper transport of water and mineral salts. When the plant is supported and remaining straight, then water and mineral salts from the roots is absorbed, transported up the stem until it reaches the leaves where it is required for photosynthesis. So, learner, you need to understand that support becomes very vital for the growth and development of plants. The other one is transportation of synthesized materials. Synthesized materials will need to grow, to move. Synthesized materials will be transported from the leaves where they are manufactured until they reach the other parts of the plant. That is very much important. Our next concern here will be, now, how do these plants, now that they don't move from one place to the other, how do they compensate for their lack of movement from one place? That is locomotion. How do they compensate for that? What makes them stand in their own way and they compensate for the lack of locomotion? Number one is their ability to pollinate. Now, pollination, the movement of pollen grains from the anther to the stigmas. That is a kind of movement. In as much as they don't move from one place to the other, you'll find that the movement of pollen grains constitutes what? Movement. Even if it is not locomotion. Number two, the response to tropic and nasty responses. I've already said that tropic responses are growth, movement. So when a plant grows towards the light, that is phototropism. Growing towards the water, hydrotropism. So when it is doing that kind of movement, that is a growth movement, it is compensating for the lack of locomotion. And then we have nastism. I already talked about an example here, which is called haptonasty. Haptonasty, where the Mimosa pudica plant will shrink and lose water and the leaves will cross when it is touched as a type of response. The other one is ability to disperse the fruits. The other, ability to disperse the fruits and the seeds compensates locomotion. Number four, learner, it is the ability to exploit localized nutrients. For example, you may have a plant. You may have a plant here, and this plant is having roots. And you may find out that there are some nutrients that are localized in some specific areas on the root zone. So how do the plant access this type of nutrients? So you find that the roots will grow and grow until they reach the nutrients until they reach the regions that are authorized in this specific place. Now, we want to move on now, Lana, and talk about the types of plant stems. How many types of plant stems do we have? Now, majorly, we have two types of stems, but we will talk about three of them. The first one is the herbaceous stems. Herbaceous stems. Herbaceous stems. These have the soft and easily crushed tissue. They are usually small and do not grow tall. For example, we have many types. We have the veins, we have the beans, and any other plant that have a soft, easily crushed tissue. For example, I want to show you that this is an example. Is an example of a herbaceous stem. As you can see, the stem is very soft. It is easily crushed. This is an example of a plant. Of course, you know this type of a plant, Mexican marigold. It is very soft, easily crushed. We also have another type of a herbaceous stem. As you can see, very soft. It can easily be crushed. This is an example of a herbaceous stem. Now, it is important to know that for herbaceous stems, how do they support their plants? How do they support their plants? They support their plants through turgidity. Through turgidity. That this is how you explain the phenomenon of wilting. That when this stem, remember it is soft, it has a soft tissue, it is easily broken. Now, how does this plant support itself? It supports itself through what is called turgidity. Turgidity. So when these roots absorb water, the water will move by osmosis. It will make the cells of the root turgid. It will move observing what is called the concentration gradient, making the cells of the stem turgid. And once they are turgid, they support the plant. So this plant will stand in as much as the cells become turgid. That is the reason why during the dry period, the herbaceous type of stem, during the dry period, when they lose water, the cells are going to shrink. And when the cells shrink, you find this type of a plant wilting. So for example, you can be able to see some parts of these leaves are shrinking. They are wilting. Why is this so? It is because, as you can see, this stem is soft and tender. So when it loses water by osmosis, the cells are going to shrink, therefore causing this type of herbaceous stem to wilt. That is how you explain the phenomenon of shrinking or wilting in plants. Number two, dear learner, is the woody stems. The woody stems. As you can see, they have stiff, thickened, or lignified tissues. Now, I want to show an example. So, dear learner, I want to show you this type of a stem. This is called a woody stem. So, as you can be able to see, it is stiff. Look at this. Very stiff. The stem is stiff. Stiff. It is also thickened or lignified tissue. Now, when you talk about lignified tissue, we are going to see in a diagram what do we mean by lignified. But in the first place, I want you to see it is stiff. Look at this. Very stiff. This is an example of a woody stem. Very, very thick. There are some tissues that are going to make this type of stem very thick. Now, we are going to see that one. That the reason why this stem, Lana, I want you to see the reason why this type of woody stems become thick. I want to see this cross section of this stem. Now, as you can see, I have drawn a cross section of a stem. Look, we have the outer part, of course, which is now the epidermis, of course, and then the cortex. But here we are focusing on some strengthening tissues that help the woody stems to stand firm. Look at this now. We have the parenchyma tissue. The parenchyma tissue, we are going to see it later on, the composition of parenchyma tissue. It is a strengthening tissue. We have another one which is called sclerenchyma. Sclerenchyma. Look at the location. Outside, nearest to the phloem, nearest to the phloem, is called sclerenchyma tissue. We have the parenchyma tissue. We know this one is the one that is responsible for packaging and storage of food products. So once it is packed with food, it becomes firm and rigid, and it also helps to do what is called support. Remember, phloem is for transportation of manufactured food. Xylem is transportation of water and mineral salts. So if you take this cross section across and you make a cut through the cross section of a dichotomous stem, you will come up with such kind of a distribution. The epidermis outside. Now we have the collenchyma, the parenchyma, and all these are now part of the strengthening tissue. All of these, they are strengthening tissue, as I've said. And remember, the parenchyma is also called chlorenchyma. Chlorenchyma, because it has some photosynthetic things inside there. Some of them, they do photosynthesis. That is why it's also called chlorenchyma. Now, dear Nana, before I continue with this explanation, I want to show you here the strengthening tissue. For example, the collenchyma. I've talked about here. Some of them are lignified and others are thickened. So you realize that collenchyma tissue, it is thickened by cellulose. And we also have sclerenchyma, it is thickened by lignin. And here we have cellulose. And also we have the xylem vessels. Remember, the work of the xylem vessels is to conduct water and mineral salts from the roots through the stem until they reach the roots. So the xylem vessels are known to be lignified by what is called lignin. These are strengthening tissue. And also we have tracheids. In your form 2, transport in plant, you are taught that tracheids are essentially modified. These are modified xylem. They are modified xylem. And they are known, the tracheids are known to have tapering ends. The ends of the tracheids are known to be tapering. They have such a design. But they have also dead ends. The walls have that dead ends. And those dead ends are the ones that contributes to the strengthening of the stem and therefore support. Now, we have another category of stems which are referred to as weak stems. Most of those are herbaceous stems, of course, but they are classified as weak stems of climbing plants. So you realize that there are some plants that are known to climb from one place to the other, from the soil. They climb by many means. For example, we have the clippers. And I want you to show you an example of a clipper. This is an example, dear Lana. This is what is called Kikuyu grass. And as you can see, when it is on the soil, it lies flat on the rock surface or on the soil. So you can see how it grows and grows, producing leaves and what have you. But what I want you to do, this is an example of a clipper, is a climbing plant. Number 2, we have twinning plant. Lana, I want you to see this type of a plant. It twins around this supportive plant, this supportive tissue. So it is a twinning plant. It is a climber. It climbs from one place to the other, upwards. We have examples of baka beans, they also grow like this, and so on and so forth. They twin around this type of a plant. And remember, in response and movement, and irritability, we talked about how they move, how auxins move from this part that is touched, they move to the other side, they cause more growth, causing the plant to twin around. Next, we have the use of tendrils. Lana, I have an example. As you can see, this type of a plant, as you can see, this is what is called tendrils. You're able to see the tendrils. These are the ones that they hook themselves around the plant. And that is how this type of a climbing plant supports itself up as it climbs. So this tendril will coil itself around the the supporting plant, and then it will grow upwards. That is how this type of plants, the climbing plants, use tendrils for them to grow. And then we have the support through thorns and spines. Lana, I have an example of a flower here. And this flower uses this type of thorns. As you can be able to see, there are some thorns that are located on this part. And these thorns are very much important in helping this type of flower to attach itself on the rock or on any hard substance along it. So these are examples of thorns that helps this climbing plant to support itself and stand firm. So that is what we are talking about. So Lana, I want to go to take you through very fast through the summary of how the plants achieve their support. In summary, how do the plants achieve their support? I will give you 5 points that summarizes how plants support themselves, and then I will leave you with a question that will help you to revise and you to understand how the plants support themselves. So let me give you the 4 points. So, dear learner, we want to summarize what we have just learned about support in plants. We have already seen what is support, we have seen what is movement, we have also looked at what is locomotion, we have seen the types of movement in plants, we have also looked how do plants compensate for the lack of movement, that is lack of locomotion. We have also gone ahead to demonstrate the type of stems. We have talked about woody stems, we have talked about herbaceous stems, and we have also talked about climbing plants and how they support themselves. So in summary, how is support achieved in plants? So number one, I have said turgidity of herbaceous plants. This is where we talk about Tagger pressure. Tagger pressure. When the plants absorb water, the cells of the plants absorb water by osmosis, become turgid and swell. They make the plant stem to become erect, to become firm, and that is how number one, support is achieved. Number two, we have collenchyma and sclerenchyma tissues. These are closely packed tissues. And these closely packed tissues, they have a capability, they have an ability, because of the packaging in which they are packed, they help the plants to provide support. They help the plants to obtain support by the roots, also by the stems. So, number three, we have an inelastic cuticle that is found on the epidermis. It is covered by a waxy layer. And this waxy layer, it helps the stem to keep the shape, and also it helps to prevent an inward pressure. It helps to withstand an inward pressure because of turgidity, which is caused by a force. And this force, it helps the plant to remain upright. So we have an inelastic cuticle. Remember, on the outside of the stem, this being a cross-section of the stem, on the outside we have what is called the epidermis. And so on this epidermis, we have a waxy tissue. We have a waxy tissue that helps to withstand. Remember, there's some pressure that is exerted on this side when the cells become tighter. And that pressure, it forces this part of the epidermis to become firm. And that is how support is also achieved. Number three, the xylem plexus and the trachea are lignified. What do you mean by lignified? We have what is called lignin. Lignin is a complex polysaccharide, a very complex polysaccharide, and that it is strengthened. It is very strong, being a complex polysaccharide, like cellulose. It helps in supporting these plants. We have supporting tissues of climbing plants. Again, in summary, I have talked about tendrils. Lana, tendrils. Remember, I've talked about the tendrils here. I've talked about my lana. I've talked about the thorns. I have also talked about the climbing plants. And the clippers that I've talked about. So this is what we have talked about today. Now, dear learner, I want you to think about this question. As I wind up on this topic of support and movement in plants, I want you to look at this question. And I want you to look at it in relation to support. In relation to support in plants, explain the phenomenon of wilting. In relation to support, explain the phenomenon of wilting. I repeat, dear learner, in relation to support, explain the phenomenon of wilting in plants. So when you look at that question, you'll be summarizing, of course, what you have talked about. What is support? How is it achieved in plants? And that wilting is a phenomenon in herbaceous plants. Until next time, I want to appreciate you for listening to this topic. Keep safe at home. Wash your hands. Keep social distancing. And may God bless you as you revise. I wish you well. Thank you.